Dear Christians, I understand the pain and the dissonance of the argument of spanking. I get it. I used to be there. I was raised deeply in Christianity. I followed the traditions for many years. I was very devout, and I followed what the Bible said, right? Well, it turns out that I wasn't actually following what the Bible said, but I was following traditions of men that were put in place based on an improper exegetical process. So if you haven't actually read the Bible or studied the Bible, there's a Bible study process called exegesis. That is the proper interpretation of Scripture. You find out if it is an allegory, if it's a song, if it's a teaching, if it's a historical event. There's all of these different ways to categorize teaching. So a lot of the times when we read the Bible in modern times, we read it through the lens of different exegetical processes from a past time when words meant things differently. It's very hard to understand the exact meanings of anything because of the long historical gaps, the way that words change, the way that cultures change, things like that. Yes, the original text, the way it was written, is maintained, and we don't actually know how to apply that to our lives. So we have these very overarching, sweeping concepts within Christianity, something like spanking, spare the rod, spoil the child. We all know that, right? We don't want our kids to go to hell. So there's that feeling like, oh, I have to discipline my child. Well, what does that actually mean? What does that verse mean? And what are other verses? And since we're, Christians here, let's think, what was Jesus talking about? Because, the whole Old Testament was an accumulation of coming to usher in the Christ, to usher in that. You know the traditions. And so what was Jesus saying? What were the new teachings of the New Testament and Jesus' new teachings of love saying, contrasted with teachings from ancient times? So I'd like to say the first one we got is Proverbs 13:24. Proverbs 13:24, the classic. He who withholds the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Now, that's a very clear example. Like, okay, well, if you don't discipline your kid with a rod, if you don't spank your child, then they're fucked. Whatever it is. Let's see here. There's a discipline diligently. He hates his son. That's it. He hates his son. That's the message there. Now, you got to understand that Proverbs 13, it's a contrasting book of the good and the wicked. It's kind of just showing all of these different things. Hey, here's something good, here's something bad, here's something good. It's like a bunch of different sayings. It's a bunch of little quotes that somebody wrote down and piled in. I'll just pick a couple of them. This is from the same chapter. The ransom of a man's life and his wealth, but the poor hears no rebuke. Okay? Abundant fool is in the fallow ground of the poor, but it is swept away by injustice. Okay? The teaching of the wise is the foundation of life, to turn aside from the snares of death. Okay, so there's no continuity in here. There's just sayings, and one pops out of just common. These are common, like, hey, best practices for our culture and time. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Just a quick little saying. That's it. And there's maybe there's 15 different verses that talk about different discipline things in the Bible, but that's the one that Christianity takes. Now, keep in mind Proverbs, a little book of poems and sayings and things like that. Do you understand the concept of when this was written? This was about mid-900th century, or a mid-9th century BC, so before Christ. So that puts it at approximately 10 to 11,000 years ago. 10 to 11,000 years ago, all right? Understand that concept. Just think of the United States. We've been around for a little bit longer than 250 years. Now, think about what 10,000 years would feel like, right? That's incomprehensible. So, how has this shifted? What did this mean then? Were these words accurate? And even the words I'm reading from a New American Standard Bible are a translation from the original text. So if you're just taking that and saying, well, the Bible says it, all right. So you got Proverbs 23:13-4 here. There's another one. Same 10,000-year-old text, Nice things to say. Proverbs 23:13-4. Let's get that. I should have just opened up before, but hey. Do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you strike him with a rod, he will not die. You shall strike him with a rod and rescue his soul from Sheol. So we say, we have to strike our children with a rod or they will be sent to Sheol, hell. Okay. You may perceive Sheol as hell, but that's only because you don't have a proper exegesis. You don't know what you're doing. Sheol was a ancient tradition of the underworld. This is the idea of we don't have any travel, we don't have any flights, we don't understand what is around the other side of the world. We're thinking everything is just this flat surface, and there's this underworld, the sun, this magical thing in the sky. The Son of Man goes into the underworld, the East Star, in fact, as it rises in the east, and it is this going into the death and the resurrection and coming back around. That's where all those traditions of Easter and things like that came from, these ancient ways of being. That's where all the talk of the underworld comes from, literally under the world, because we don't know what's down there, right? And so there was these traditions of, okay, there's this place, when you get buried, your soul goes somewhere under the world, or your spirit, your energy and things like that goes somewhere else. And it was like an unknown, right? It was not speaking of hell. Later on, people may interpret that as hell, but that's not culturally what they were talking about with Sheol. So, again, kind of a trite phrase, just general societal stuff, mixed in with a whole bunch of other stuff. Let's see what this is kind of generally about. Yeah, this is just like conduct, life and conduct and stuff like that. This is kind of how you do your stuff. Do not speak in the hearing of fools, for they will despise the wisdom of your words. Great, that's probably what I'm doing right here. My son, in your heart is wise, and my own heart is also will be glad. It's just like trite sayings. It's all mixed up. It's just, here's a little saying, like it's like fortune cookies. They put a bunch of fortune cookies. Each one's a fortune cookie. You get the picture. And then we take that, we gotta save our child from hell, otherwise, if we don't spank him, which is literally hell. So you got Colossians 3:21 here. Let's go into the New Testament now. We are no longer in, 10,000-year-old things. We're in 2,000-year-old things, Still pretty weird. Colossians 3:21. Let's see, where the hell's Colossians? I used to know this a lot better. There's Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians. That's what it, not Thessalonians. Colossians, there's a Colossians. Okay, 3:21. I have to look at my notes on that one. We're doing a sermon here, kids. This is great. 3:21. Oh God, I'll get to this eventually. Here, I'll learn how to do a sermon. Who will transform the body of our humble state into conformity with the... That's not it. What the fuck? Colossians 3:20. Oh, that's Philippians. I'm good at... Oh, that's Colossians right there. Short little books, easy to get confused. 3:21. Fathers. So, speaking of parents here in this context. This is in regards to like family relations. This is the context. So, it starts with wives. How do you like this one, ladies? Wives, be subjects to your husband as fitting to the Lord. Right? Let's just rethink that. Husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them. Okay, great advice. Some more fortune cookies here. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so they will not lose heart. You don't want to crush their spirits. Fathers, don't exasperate. Don't crush their spirit. Right here, it's like, don't fucking spank your kids. It'll crush their little hearts. They will lose heart. Right there, New Testament. Right? Much more modern, we're following this kind of stuff. Right there, right in front of your face. Ephesians 6:4. Ephesians, Philippians. Let's read this one. Let's see what it has to say. 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your child to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, you perceive of discipline as spanking because you have no idea what you're talking about. But this discipline and instruction of the Lord is more of a spiritual practice, of a state of mindfulness, of prayer, of love. That's not what it's talking about in this spiritual discipline, things like that. So it has nothing to do with the discipline of striking your child. Now, if we didn't, I could come up with many examples like that in here. Many more than one or two examples that are 10,000 years old of fortune cookies that say, spare the rod, spoil the child. Many more, all New Testament. But let's go ahead and just look at what Jesus has to say. 1 John 4:18, right? Oh, 1 John, not John. Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Timothy, Hebrews, James, John. Peter? 1 John. There it is. 1 John 4:18. Oh, I had a bookmark on that. I guess I could have done that. But there is no, and pay attention to this. This is Jesus speaking. This is speaking of God is love. Like God is love. That's the whole section of this that he's talking about. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. So if you want to teach your children to not follow Jesus' teachings, to not be love, and to have fear, then punish them. If you want to go against Jesus' teachings, then punish them. All right? Now you're going to say, oh, well, I can't, well, what, I have to punish my children, otherwise I bring the child up in the way they should go. Okay? All of those feelings that you're having are cultural context. All of those feelings you're having are things that you've bought into culturally. They don't have anything to do with the teachings of the Bible. So you're following a fallacy. You're following a culture that is absolutely fucked, that is damaging your children. We can see scientifically speaking how it affects the cortisol regulation systems, how it affects the vagus nerve, how it will continually trigger your amygdala and keep you in constant stress, giving you gut health problems, autoimmune problems, all of the emotional dysregulation, the stress, the anxiety, all of that is highly supported by an environment of spanking and striking our children. Not only that, but we go ahead and spank our kids and say, okay, well, if somebody's doing something wrong, let's hit them. If we don't like what's going on here, let's hit them. And so often parents have zero control in these spankings. They're upset. You are literally letting all of your pain and aggression that was caused you out on your children, and you're using the Bible to justify it. That's sick. That's twisted. And that has nothing to do with what Jesus was talking about. So if you actually want to move into a state of Christianity, into a state of what Christ was talking about, it is a space of love, and it has nothing to do with spanking your children.